Welcome to Baptist for Liberty. I'm your host, Joanna Works.
And Andrew Sullivan.
And today I have a special guest in our studio, Brother Timothy Works.
Hello, I'm Timothy Works.
Full disclosure, he is both my father and my pastor. He pastors at Liberty Missionary Baptist Church in Burton, Michigan. How long did you spend on the fire department?
I was 12 years a chaplain with the fire department.
Okay. And so today's subject is crisis management, because our theme for May and June has been on order. And so we want to talk about when things are in disorder and how to be prepared for that. So Dad has prepared kind of a presentation or something to talk about, and then we'll do some discussion and questions and answers.
Okay. Well, as Joanna has already said, I was a chaplain for 12 years with the Graham Fire and Rescue in Pierce County, Washington. Prior to that, I had been in the ministry since May of 1969. That's when I surrendered to the Lord's call to preach and made that calling known. And so I've been engaged in the ministry ever since. I was ordained as a pastor in January of 1973, and had started Bible college in 1969. My first pastorate, and I was only 22 years old at the time, and it seemed like I preached more funerals than I did weddings. And one of the things that really struck me was how inadequate I felt in trying to, when asked to counsel with people and talk to people who were going through a grief situation where they'd lost someone. And a lot of that had to do because I didn't have that much life experience under my belt at the time. And two, I don't think that when I was going to Bible college, they really dealt a lot in that subject. And so I just felt very inadequate, what to say. I felt like, you hear a lot of cliches and things like that, but I felt that was not really adequate to really comfort people when they were going through grief. And so something like 27 years later, in August of 1996, I got recruited to become a chaplain, and I didn't even know the fire department had chaplains. I happened to run across he was the executive director of the fire department at that time instead of a chief, and we had met in a restaurant and began talking, and he found out that I pastored a church in the area. And he asked if I'd ever considered being a chaplain, and I said, no, I didn't know that you had him. And so they had been looking for actually a third chaplain. They had two. And so we went down, talked to them, interviewed with them, and it just seemed to click. I think the timing and everything for me, and we began working as a chaplain, and part of the training as a chaplain is what they called CISM, or Critical Incident and Stress Management. And a lot of this was geared both toward dealing with the emergency service personnel, firefighting personnel, and on incidents. But also I took the things that I learned and applied it in dealing with individuals. One of the things that I got called on to do the most was death in a home, death by natural causes. In the home, usually it was an elderly person, and I would go in and talk with the family, stay with the family. Sometimes it could be a long process for the medical examiner to announce them dead, release them to a funeral home, contact a funeral home, have them come out, and to retrieve the body. And the fire department personnel, they don't like to leave the family alone at that time, and so I would stay until all of that was completed and the other personnel could get back in service. So And that was kind of my introduction into the critical incident and stress management, and learned a lot about that. And a critical incident or a crisis is kind of defined as, well, one definition is any time the old rules don't work. Another one is when the stress of any given situation overwhelms our normal ability to cope. And our ability to cope, and I think, as Joanna has mentioned, that the focus here this evening is more on kind of preparation and things for dealing with crisis. Coping and coping skills, our coping mechanism, is an important part of that, and how well people deal with situations and so on. Coping has to do with being able to accept something that has happened and deal with it to where that you're able to move on, to heal, to recover, and get back to a normal, or in some cases a new normal routine for your life. And so it's our coping skills that allow us to do that. We all experience stress of one kind or another on a daily basis. Some stress is considered good, and stress is, from a more of a clinical definition, is the idea of when there's outside stressors that our bodies respond to, and you may not realize it, but our bodies respond to stress by exerting certain chemicals, such as if something startles you suddenly or scares you, the body produces and dumps a lot of adrenaline into the system to enable us to, the old saying is fight or flight, to be able to, and it gives us energy, it prepares the body, enables the body to do things. And the body responds to different kinds of stress in different ways, but it usually involves the body producing these chemicals, and a lot of times they affect certain body organs, such as the heart. Heart begins to beat faster, pump more blood, and so on. And that's a normal reaction. The problem arises when we're under a lot of stress, or the stress is more prolonged, and there's this constant strain on the system, and it can create some detrimental or harmful effects. And people, usually when we're under stress, they say emotions are higher, the emotions are up, but the cognitive ability decreases because of the way the brain functions, and it goes into a different mode, and so it's more of a reaction mode. And so the thinking, the cognitive, is decreased in times of stress. So many of these things, we're trained how to recognize the symptoms of stress and things to do to help mitigate the stress, and that's the reason I call it crisis management. It's the idea is that you can manage the crisis. There are things you can do to mitigate the effects and to speed and help the recovery when somebody is going through these situations and circumstances. As we've kind of talked a little bit about stress, and one of the things, as far as our ability to cope, our individual and personal coping skills, as far as preparing ourselves, because we know at some point we're going to find ourselves in a stressful situation. And part of the coping, I think, is the idea of making sense of what happens. Especially things happen, part of our ability to accept them, to make sense of it, to kind of absorb that and normalize it into our thinking and to be able to recover and go on, whether it be grief or a shock or something traumatic happens, the stress and things like this that comes into our lives. And different people react to to the same situation differently, and a lot of that depends on their coping skills. And one of the things that they brought out in our training, that people with a strong faith tend to be able to tolerate a lot more stress. And I think that is because our faith gives us a world view, and that's part of the idea of making sense of things. We have our world view that allows us to accept the things that happen in life, to deal with it, and to go on. And whenever a situation happens and occurs that overwhelms our normal ability to cope, then that creates a crisis for us or for that individual. And the stress of that situation can be overwhelming at times. Example I thought of is a lot of people, and I think the problem sometimes is that people's worldview is very shallow and inadequate to deal with some of the things of life that will come our way. And example that I was thinking of is how that we all expect to die. We know that everyone dies, but a lot of times our worldview is death comes when you're old, you've lived a long life, your old age and a full life, and then that's natural. But it doesn't seem natural when a child dies, especially if it's in some kind of what appears as a tragic and unnecessary accident or something. And then that's when people's stress really goes up. That's when, if you have that worldview that it only happens to old people, and then something like that happens close to home, someone you know, especially someone you love, dies, as a child, that's just kind of overwhelms that worldview, and for some people it creates what they call a crisis of faith, because they were not prepared to accept or have something like that happen. And we see that in the scriptures when David and Bathsheba, their first child, and was sick, and he prayed and fasted the child might be spared, but the child died, and then he got up, cleaned himself up, because he understood God is in control. God can do all things, and as it pleases him, and he understood part of the reason why the child died, and was able to accept it and get back into a routine and get back to kind of a normal, if you will, after something like that, because his worldview was able to accept that, to make sense of it, and to go on. I did a study and actually taught a series of messages in the church entitled The Theology of Loss and the Ministry of Comfort, and based a lot of that on the book of Job. There's just so much information there. Job experienced more loss in one day than most several people can do in their lifetimes combined. And so there's a lot of good material in there to study on the idea of loss and grieving and coping with loss. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. And that's what I had to deal with as a chaplain and going in. And was thinking about some of the incidents and the types of incidents that I had to deal with that were particularly stressful, and therefore prone to create a crisis situation with people. Death of a child, obviously, is one of the biggies, and including SIDS. Suicide, and what they called line of duty death. This was particularly for emergency personnel when one of their own is killed in the line of duty. And and I've personally been involved in all three of these situations during the 12 years that I served as a chaplain. A fourth, for which we trained, but fortunately never had the experience of dealing with, was what they call an MCI, or a mass casualty incident, where there were multiples. I'm not sure exactly what the limit was, if it was over 3 or 4 casualties in a single incident, then it was considered a mass casualty incident. And of course, 9/11 was one of those, Katrina, and different ones like that. And a lot of these involve prolonged exposure to these scenes of devastation, and that has the potential for a lot of stress and being exposed to it for an extended period of time, overcoming individuals' ability to deal with those situations. So, as I said, just having not just the personal coping skills, but then also a support network, family, friends, especially if you are a person of faith, a faith-based family and support group. These people that can come alongside long-term. As a chaplain, I was kind of like what first aid is to the hospital, to someone who's injured. You just kind of stabilize them, prepare them, and transport them for the extended care that they need to recover. The work of a chaplain was kind of like an emotional, spiritual first aid. We stabilized the individual and tried to get that support network in to work with that individual, their family, friends, neighbors, church, whatever they had, and get those people in and working with that individual to carry through to help and support them in dealing with whatever the incident was.
It sounds like you had a lot of training for this. Did you?
Over the period of 12 years, once a year they would have the state CISM conference, and they would have, there was 3 basic levels of CISM training we went through, which was the basic, the peer, and then advanced CISM. And you couldn't get all that at one time, so that spread out over at least 3 years. There were I had pastoral crisis intervention, CISM with families, CISM with children, terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. That's over the period of time I had quite a bit of training in various areas of that, plus just kind of on-the-job training. The chaplain, the older chaplain was there when I started. He was giving me pointers. He took me along on a couple of calls. And then, like my first call, he talking about on-the-job training. My first call I went on, I wasn't supposed to be going out by myself, but at that particular time, there was no chaplains available anywhere in the area, because we had the 2 other chaplains. The sheriff's department had chaplains. There was other chaplains in the area, but nobody would seem to be available that particular night. And so I got thrown into a chief's car and lights and sirens to the scene of an auto accident out in the country. And as we arrived there and I get out of the car, and I'm trying to remember everything the other chaplain had told me about, an accident scene, the police is in control, they're in charge of the scene, not to disturb anything. So I'm kind of careful walking up to the incident command. Battalion chief was incident command there, and presented myself, and I remember him saying, "Chaplain, I'm glad you're here. I've got a dead 18-year-old boy on the gurney in the medic unit. There's his mother, there's his father, there's his younger brother. Go deal with them." So that was kind of my introduction to chaplaincy.
Wow, so you were just thrown into it.
Yeah. Kind of like the way they teach some people to swim. Just throw them in, and they either sink or swim.
Wow.
I learned to swim real quick.
When you were 9/11, one of the things I remember about that day was we had scheduled 2 years in advance, the department we were on had scheduled training for a mass incident, and it was they almost canceled it because of 9/11 and just everybody's emotions being so high and the shock and everything of it. But we went to drill that Tuesday because it's like, no, we need this training for a reason. And that was my first summer on support services with the fire department. And that was just, it was very surreal to see all this stuff in the news in the morning and less than 12 hours later training on being in those kind of incidents.
Wow.
Did you remember that, Dad?
What I remember is one of our volunteer firefighters was in New York at the time, and they couldn't get a hold of her, and they was afraid. One of the firefighters was just kind of feeling devastated because he had encouraged her to go to the World Trade Center because the view there was better than from the Empire State Building, and he was afraid that she had been there, and because they couldn't get a hold of her on the phone, but she was okay, and she came back. She wasn't anywhere near there when that happened, but she happened to be in New York at the time that it happened.
Yeah.
That I remember that from that drill night.
Yeah, that was a lot of high stress that night.
Yeah. We were all feeling some stress. I mean, just sitting there and seeing we got a call from somebody and said, "You watching TV?" And no. And so we turned the TV on and was watching a little bit just as the second plane hit the tower. And I tell you what, I remember on the first anniversary of 9/11, they had a special thing there at the fire station. And they had the speakers on, and Firecom, our dispatch, did a special tone out, one for when each tower fell at that time in the morning on the anniversary of 9/11. And hearing those tones go out, that is a very haunting sound and very emotional to just hear that. You're being quiet today, Andrew.
No, I'm just that's just a lot to take in, especially with like 9/11, all the emotions that are going through your mind. Do you think that going through 9/11 that you were adequately trained to help in that moment?
I don't know about from a fire department perspective. Yes, I'm sure I was, but I think one of the things that adequately prepared me as far as my coping with stress and things like that is my faith. You know, I believe in a sovereign God, and I do not always understand why he does the things that he does, but I do believe that all things happen for a purpose. He's in control, and so I can leave the details to him. I don't, and just lean on him for strength and to get through it by, his grace. As Paul said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And actually, one time I was doing a little training lesson with the firefighters on stress and all, and I used the Apostle Paul as an example. When God had given him the thorn in the flesh, and Paul said he asked him 3 times to remove it. And one of the things about stress is you get in that recycling the same thoughts, the same images over and over again. You get stuck in a loop. And I was thinking about that with Paul. I'm sure he felt stressed because of this thorn in the flesh. He felt it was hindering him in being able to do the Lord's work. And And he was asking God to remove it, and God said, "No, it said, my grace is sufficient for you." And I think Paul refers back to that when he says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." And I think that as a believer and with a relationship with the Lord, that's the big part of my coping skills. And like I say, my work there on the fire department, I was thrown into stressful situations. I had to deal with people that were going through some very stressful situations, and part of my work is to be able to remain calm and create kind of a calming effect on other people to help them to calm down. And I think God's Spirit and His grace is what prepares me and helps me to get through those situations. Other people, sometimes I don't know how people get through sometimes the things that they are exposed to, and some people don't. Some people have a very difficult time. Some people never get over some of those things, and I believe part of that is due to their lack of a good, strong coping mechanism, and maybe the lack of a good, strong support network, people that can come alongside and comfort them. So, but I have both a personal faith, family, friends, and especially church family and people that know the Lord, that know how to, know what would be a comfort and help to me. And so I think that more than anything, more than what I learned on the fire department, helped prepare me for those things when they happened. Though what I learned on the fire department, I think, really helped me and gave me the tools and a framework for understanding grief and dealing with it, that I was able to carry over into the pastoral side of it, and as a pastor then, in dealing with when I'm asked to preach a funeral or deal with people that are going through grief or something like that. Then what I learned on the fire department really gave me the framework around which to take the scriptures and the things that I've learned there about God and work it together. That I think was a big help to me.
All things work together for good.
Yeah, all things work together for good. And
one of the descriptions for a crisis that you read was the old rules don't apply.
No, the old rules don't work.
Or the old rules don't work. Okay. From a Christian standpoint, though, if our mindset and rules are based on Scripture, how can that...
Well, see, that's what I'm saying, though. Some people don't have that foundation. And so when they are, whatever their worldview is, because I said, some people's worldview is shallow and not really adequate to deal with some of the major stresses in life. And so whatever their worldview is, whatever their coping level is, that situation overwhelms it. What they depended on or what got them through lesser situations no longer work in that situation. And sometimes even people of faith, it can, because even as a believer, we experience grief, and that is normal. And sometimes the grief can be so overwhelming, and again, as the emotion goes up, our cognitive skills, our ability to think through, to remember scriptures, is lowered. And we can be hit, and anybody, nobody is beyond being in a situation where they're overwhelmed by the stress of the situation. And it may just be, especially prolonged exposure. The fatigue and this ongoing stress can just overwhelm our ability to cope. But the recovery then, if you have that faith-based relationship with the Lord and understanding of the Scriptures and are strong in faith, the recovery will be a lot quicker. I mean, it may overwhelm you temporarily, but the recovery. But it seems like as soon as the Lord told Paul, said, "My grace is sufficient," Paul just, or at least in his telling of it, is like he snapped back very quickly then, and I'll rather than glory in my infirmities then.
Right, and that was our theme verse for our previous theme had been on strength, and that was our theme verse for that topic.
Yeah.
And talking about the recovery phase, because Andrew, you're studying counseling. So does any of this sound like anything you've already studied?
I was actually going to comment on that. It seems like there are a lot of parallels with what you're saying and what I've learned in school.
Yeah, we're dealing with what trauma, psychotrauma in extreme situations. And when they have a CISM team, one of the members has to be a mental health professional. And so there's a lot of overlap between what we're learning and learning to apply with the counseling and that aspect. So there should be a lot of similarities. And I tried not to get into too much of the jargon, acute stress and post-traumatic stress and a lot of those things, but there is an overlapping, I think, between what I did as a chaplain and the training I had and what someone in the counseling field and just general counseling would be involved in.
Especially with you, like you said, you're the first aid, and a counselor would be more that long-term care.
Right. And a lot of times, part of that is getting them ready to pass on to, if they need referrals for more longer-term care.
Did you have any more thoughts you want to add to that, Andrew?
Well, it sounds like that with having a mental health counselor and you as a chaplain, that it sounds like you got a decent amount of psychological training as well.
Yeah, there was some of that. And when I was saying on a CISM team, and those were used for debriefings set up with the department for department personnel after what was considered a critical incident. The department had certain criteria. Certain incidents would automatically require debriefing, and we would contact the local CISM team. And a lot of times, since I was probably at the scene, I wouldn't be part of the team doing the debriefing. I'd be part of the personnel that was being debriefed, and I've been in that situation several times. And it was that CISM team would have a mental health professional as a part of the team, and they were part of the training when we'd go to the CISM training. Mental health professionals would be present. Sometimes they were doing the training. A lot of the books that we use, the textbooks, were written by people in the mental health profession that dealt specifically with the trauma and all from critical incident stress and, with emergency service personnel.
I think it's important to know, a lot of people will talk about who our heroes are. In the fire department, the police officers, the military, at least in the fire department that I saw, is they were aware of their own weaknesses, and they tried to take care of their own so that people didn't fall through the cracks. These days, we're constantly hearing the news, military personnel have PTSD, and they're not getting all the adequate support that they need. And suicide rates are really high among our military personnel right now.
In the police department they have a high suicide rate as well. Not so much firefighters, but it happens there too once in a while. But
Do you think the training and how the department takes care of their own had a huge effect on that?
Well, they've done studies, and obviously the CISM training, the CISM debriefings after specific types of incidents has been shown to help mitigate the long-term effects of the critical incident stress.
When you were on the scene, were you able to talk with the victims about their faith or no?
Yes, that was one of the things that on the department as a chaplain, we were never asked to do anything. They would not put us in a situation that we would feel like would compromise our faith. In dealing with people, though, in the public, you have no control over who the victim's going to be and what their relationship may be. And so it's one of the things that you would kind of feel out. And if they were open to you talking about, there was some people, I tell you, just had considering the circumstances, but because they knew the Lord and you was able to talk to them about the Lord and about the Scriptures and all, there was a good bonding and just a good fellowship there. Other times, not so much so. I've had people cursing and carrying on because they're under a lot of stress and grieving, and they're just striking out. And so the one thing we're taught is you never take it personal. That's just part of them trying to cope with and deal with the stress. They're venting their anger, their frustration, and things like that. And so you just let them vent. You don't take it personal. But, I would feel people out and try to determine what is their spiritual relationship and their level of understanding. And to formulate the best approach for dealing with them. Some people, if they're lost, they don't know the Lord. It's their cognitive skills aren't at the highest point anyway. So, you don't argue with them. You don't talk theology with them. You just do what you can to comfort them. A lot of times just letting them know you're not alone. You can get through this. We're here to help you. And, and sometimes that's all you can do. And sometimes that's all they need. If they have a church, have a pastor, we offer to contact them, get those people in, and to help them. Otherwise, family, neighbors, people like that, to come in because, we're just there for a short time, and they're going to need some help, and we will, try to tell them what they can do for themselves. We try to work with them, plus, the people coming in, if we can help them, give them some tips, here's some things to look for, here's some things you can do to help them, then that's what we would do. But then in the follow-up later when, if we have opportunity, I've gone back and witnessed to people, invited them to church and different things like that and talked to them about the Lord, but not at the scene at the time of the incident so much, unless they were open to that and, needed that, and then we could.
Okay, so it's more about assessing the situation.
Correct. Assessing, what has happened, but also the people's emotional state, spiritual state at that time. And like I say, because everybody's different, their coping skills are different. How they deal with stress is going to be different, and you need to find out this particular person, where are they, and what can I do to help to get them kind of stabilized and moving toward, the recovery and healing from this situation.
One situation in the Scriptures of grief was when Lazarus died, and Jesus, one of the shortest verses in the Scriptures is Jesus wept, which I think shows that crying is healthy. There's some people, they think they maybe it's sign of weakness, or for whatever reason, they won't allow themselves that kind of grief. But Jesus gives us an example of weeping.
Correct. And, and especially when you're dealing with some emergency service personnel, they tend to be very macho, and they try to hold things in and not show that they're stressed, and they feel like, well, what are these other firefighters going to think of me, or what are these other police officers going to think of me, that I'm weak or something. But grieving is natural. And one of the things we was taught to tell people is that you're having a normal reaction. You're a normal person having a normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. So, if you cry, if you feel confused, you can't remember things, that's normal under the circumstances. That is, you're behaving in a normal fashion for someone going through this. Because sometimes they just feel so overwhelmed, they think they're going crazy, or just they're falling apart, and all that. This is not normal. What's not normal is the situation you're in. It's not part of your normal life, and it can be overwhelming. But those reactions are normal in those circumstances. To cry. The scriptures, I believe when Stephen died, and it says, men carried him out to bury him. Let me see, Stephen. Okay. Devout men carried Stephen to his burial and made great lamentation over him. And so there we see a grieving process. These were devout men, and men that withstood persecution, men that hazarded their lives for the gospel. These were not wimps. They were not weak, but they made lamentation over Stephen, one of their brethren, who had been a great witness and used of God, and had died a martyr, and they made lamentation over for him at his death.
Another one is the mighty men of David. They came to a point where they wept.
Yeah. So, weeping or crying and showing grief is part of the process of getting over grief and getting back to normal. Or, as we say sometimes, it may be a new normal. A spouse passes away. It's never going to go back to the way it was. It's never going to be the same again. But you create a new normal, and a new routine, and you get back to functioning after that. That's one of the things that you have to explain to them, and but that you can achieve a new normal, and life goes on.
Life goes on. We talked a little bit about suicide, but something I want to talk about, because there have been suicides of even men of God last year. I think there was 3 of them. And since we're wanting to talk about preventing crisis or mitigating it as best as we can you share with us some signs and ways that we can come alongside one another and recognize that they need some kind of help?
There are some things, and there's the old cliche that hindsight is 20/20. A lot of times when something happens, people just beat themselves up. Well, I should have known. I should have seen this. I should have seen that. And it's not always true. Some of the signs are not that obvious. I got a little cheat sheet here, a little list, and clues to suicide. And there are obvious clues. Basically, when somebody says, I feel like killing myself, that's a more overt and obvious direct statements about suicidal intent. Making preparations for death in the very near future. For example, buying new clothes to be buried in and telling others about it. Having weapons around, drinking excessively. Greater levels of obvious risk-taking that are seen by others and cause them to have some concern. But some of the hidden clues that are not so obvious to other people. Extended loneliness caused by living alone. Purposeful withdrawal from friends and family. Excessive spending when one does not have the financial ability to cover the expenses. Taking leaves of absence for extended trips which are not affordable. Giving away important personal possessions. It's like, they know what they intend to do, and so they want their friends to have this or to have that, which normally they wouldn't be giving those things away. Feeling rejected, feeling that no one cares about the individual. Changes in personality. When you see, someone is normally very outgoing, very talkative, and they begin to kind of shut down, whether they're suicidal or not, those are some warning signs that something's going on. They're going through stress, they're depressed, and of course depression is a contributing factor to suicide. Thinking about death frequently, making a will, buying a weapon. These things can be indicators that if you see someone behaving in this way and behaving kind of unusual, then you can, there's reason to be concerned and to kind of come alongside that person and begin to try to find out what's wrong. Especially when people get to the point that they're going through, something has happened, they're going through intense emotional pain, extreme hopelessness or helplessness, feeling that there's no meaning in life, great difficulty asking for help, feel cut off from other people, despair, angry, resentful, hostile. These things, especially, it would appear that people feel they're in a situation and there's no other option open to them. They feel helpless and hopeless. Now, how a person that's saved can feel that way, I don't know. Satan can get us in bad shape sometimes, and we may feel so overwhelmed by sin or exposure of sin or just whether guilty or not, the accusations or financial problems that you don't see any way out of. These can overwhelm a person, and like we say, and to the extent that their normal coping skills aren't working anymore. And I know sometimes people, they have panic attacks and anxiety attacks. Sometimes these are results of chemical imbalances. Perhaps the chemical imbalance is caused by prolonged exposure to stress and things like this that can create because those chemical imbalances, too much adrenaline over an extended period of time, can have harmful effects on our organs, on our body, even our thinking. And these may all be contributing factors in the end result. Sometimes we may never know just what all has prompted it. And only God really knows what is going on in somebody's mind and heart. But these are some of the things that over time and experience, and people that have attempted and failed, and they've talked to people about it afterwards and explained, well, this was what was going through my mind at the time, kind of reveals at least what the process was in that individual. And therefore, some things we can look for, but a lot of times people will appear to be normal. And that can be a warning sign if they've been under stress, if they've been grieving, if they've been showing signs of depression, and suddenly everything seems cool. That catches people by surprise, but the reason now is because they have resolved what they're going to do about it. And so they're kind of at peace because they resolve this is what they're going to do. And so rather than taking that as a sign, oh, well, this person's better now. Not necessarily. If they've been showing some of these signs and you're concerned, and then suddenly they seem very calm, then, that might be a sign there that you need to come alongside that person. Don't leave them alone and start to do some kind of intervention with them because that could be the calm before the final storm, yeah.
If we do notice these things in friends, family, whoever, what can we do for them?
Oh.
That might be a loaded question.
It is. It's difficult. I'm fortunate. I've not had to do a intervention with somebody thinking suicide. But some of the things they say, kind of get them alone, get them away from people or circumstances and things that is creating the stress, the depression. Talk to them, show them, find out what is the real trigger here. What is it that they feel that there's no hope, and just get them to see there are some alternatives. There are some options. There are some things you can do, and help them through that. And once they begin to see, just slowing them down and giving them time to think and to work through it, and giving them some hope, giving them something that they can be doing may be enough to help. But I would also try to get them to professional, especially in this day and time. We live in a very, obviously, a wicked time. Everybody wants to blame somebody else or find someone to blame, and that's one of the things. If somebody dies, their loved ones want to blame it on somebody else. Their guilt for not recognizing, not being able to stop it, they will transfer and blame somebody else so as to relieve themselves of guilt and different things like that. And as litigious, I think that's the word for, as suit happy as people are today, and going to law over every little thing, you're kind of in a pickle sometimes. You want to come alongside and help them, and if you can and kind of get them stabilized, I would they need to seek some professional help and counseling for the long-term benefit and get through it. But a lot of times just kind of isolating them from whatever is helping to create it. If there's somebody in their life that is creating this, kind of separate from that person, talk to them, come alongside them. For the most part, don't leave them alone. And again, try to find what it is that they are feel so overwhelmed by, and that there is no hope and no other alternative, and show them that give them an alternative. Try to find something that they can do that gives them some hope for a resolution of the situation, that they're not having to do it alone, and that there is hope. And that seems to be one of the biggest benefits that you can do for a person in that situation.
We don't have any more questions, do we?
I don't think I have any more.
Okay. I was going to have Brother Works read a track he wrote. He's written a few different tracks that our church hands out, but one in particular was aimed at emergency personnel called Hell Isn't for Heroes. And we'd had this published as an article in, I believe it was our September 2013 issue. So he's going to read this quickly, and if we have any more time, we'll maybe talk about that as well.
Yes, I entitled this Hell Isn't for Heroes. There was a track many years ago that titled similar to that, but this kind of caught my attention in dealing with firefighters. It starts out answering the call. Do your ears pick up when you hear sirens? Can you tell what kind of fire is burning just by the smell of the smoke? Do you always wonder what kind of call is going on down the street and wonder if there is a way you can help? Do you drive around in a strange place and look for emergency equipment just so you can feel at home? Then you, like me, have responded to the call to be a public servant through firefighting and or EMS. We train, we study, we perform drills, practice scenarios, and review previous calls to improve. We strive for perfection. We love this vocation. On duty, we wait for the next call, and when it comes, we go. This is the story of our lives. We do not wish for bad things to happen, but if they do, we want to be there. We work to make a difference in others' lives. We come from many and varied backgrounds, yet work side by side to serve our community, our country, our communities, and fellow citizens. Our family life is interrupted by shift work, emergency call-outs, and the inevitable danger. New challenges face us daily. Some days it's the boredom and tension of waiting. Other days it is dealing with the death of a child. Some people call us heroes, but we realize that risking our lives for others is what we do. It is our job. We run in when all others are running out. Jesus said, "No man hath greater love than this, that he laid down his life for his friends." In a sense, Jesus is the ultimate firefighter. He too answered the call and laid down his life that others not perish, but through faith in him might have everlasting life, John 3:16. Thus manifesting his love for you and me by dying on the cross for our sins. Without Christ, you're not ready to face God in the judgment. You may think that because you serve your fellow man and do heroic deeds, that you're not a sinner and do not need God's forgiveness. Nothing could be further from the truth. Since Adam's fall, no man has lived up to the potential that God created man for, and that failure is sin. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, Romans 5:12. Wherefore, as by one man entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned, Romans 5:12. The other was Romans 3:28. Sin brings about not just physical death, but spiritual death, a separation from God for all eternity in the lake of fire. And as it is appointed to men once to die, but after this the judgment, Hebrews 9:27. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were open, and another book was open, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which are written in the books, according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Revelations chapter 20, verses 12 through 15. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Romans 6:23. Jesus is calling you to give your life to Him by repenting of your sins and believing in Him that He died for you. Also, He is calling you to become a disciple. Do not think that becoming a Christian is for wimps or sissies. It is a calling to duty, honor, courage, devotion, sacrifice, and service. Jesus calls us to step up and to become a different kind of hero, a spiritual hero, not just to deliver from mortal death or to bind up physical wounds, but to deliver from the eternal fires and to heal broken spirits and emotional hurts of all kinds, to bring men, women, boys, and girls to Christ, who is the great physician and healer of souls. Hell isn't for heroes, but heaven is for God's heroes. Will you answer that call?
Any comments?
Now, this is a tract from your church, correct?
Correct.
And is that something you created, or is that pre-made?
No, this is something that I created. I borrowed a little bit from the front of it from some different work intended for firefighters, but the majority of it is what I created myself. And on the back of it, I had copied what is called the Firefighter's Prayer. You want me to read that too?
Sure.
Okay, the Firefighter's Prayer. When I am called to duty, whatever flames may rage, give me strength to save a life, whatever be its age. Help me embrace a little child before it is too late, or save an older person from the horror of that fate. Enable me to be alert and to hear the weakest shout, and quickly and efficiently put the fire out. I want to fill my calling and give the best in me, to guard my every neighbor and protect his property. And if, according to God's will, I must answer death's call, bless with your protecting hand my family, one and all. I don't know who wrote that, but that is called the Firefighter's Prayer.
Wow.
Okay, we're pretty much out of time now. You can have closing thoughts and your scriptures, Andrew.
Well, I just would like to thank Brother Works for doing this interview with us. And it has, hopefully this interview has helped some of you understand more about crisis management, what it is, what to look for, and just that with the topic of May and June of order, that there is also disorder. And for the scripture for this week, coinciding with this, is John 14:1. Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. Which is John 14:1.